My former economics professor, Richard Wolff, is joining us, professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts and also teaching at the New School in New York City. Great to see you again.
Thanks for inviting me.
So there's been this thing floating around the internet. People have emailed it to me. There's a video of it. And the idea is that it's a very simple way of understanding taxes in the U.S., and it's called Bar Stool Economics. Now, I did a pretty lousy job of explaining why it's simply not valid a couple of weeks ago. Our audience was nice enough that half actually said it was good, but I wanted to bring in, the real experts to analyze this thing with me. You had a chance to review this thing, I'm guessing.
Yes, I did.
So the idea is that it likens taxes to a bar scenario, and it says that if 10 guys went in to drink one beer each, the people who make the least would get the beer for free, and the guy who makes the most would pay the most. Let's start at the beginning. Why is this just fundamentally not a good representation of the tax system in the U.S.?
Well, it's on so many levels, I kind of wonder where to start.
That was my problem.
Exactly. And, in a sense, to be fair, that's the genius of a good simplification, that it gets away from the details and leaves whoever you're telling it to with a sense that maybe they've grasped the complexity in this little simplified story.
That's right. And I even said, the great thing is you can explain that in 30 seconds, and it was going to take me 10 minutes to debunk it.
Right. So you have to take your hat off to the cleverness of it.
Yeah.
But once, as someone once said, the devil is in the details. Once you actually unpack the story, things get very much more complicated, and the outcome is pretty much the opposite of what's said. Basically, the best way to get at this is historically. What the video talks about basically is the personal income tax and how it works in terms of how it impacts different parts of the community in terms of raising the money that the government needs to provide services. So when you teach anyone about the tax system, you always have to look at two sides. One, who's paying it and how much, and on the other hand, who's benefiting from it and how much, in order to get a sense of it. This video cuts all that process short. It makes a very factually incorrect assumption because it has all the fellows at the bar getting the drinks they need and want, as if everybody, rich and poor alike, get the same services from the government that their taxes pay for. But that has never been true. That is not true now. And in fact, everybody listening or watching what we're doing today knows that. They know that in the neighborhoods where rich people live, everything is cleaner, everything is nicer, the plantings are better. Everyone knows, for example, that if you go to the most expensive colleges in the United States, Harvard, Yale, places like that, and you ever study them, you'll discover that they pay no taxes. They are given an incredible allowance, being billion-dollar corporations, that they pay no taxes at all on the income they earn, the tuition payments, the stock and bond income they earn, and so on. And that allows them to make the education, the four-year education of young people rich enough to go to Harvard and Yale, much, much cheaper than it would otherwise be if those people had to pay for a university that in turn had to pay taxes. So you get a completely different payout from government services if you are poor or middle than what you get from the government in services, tax exemptions, and so on if you are rich.
So there's two analogies here to the Bar Stool Economics. Number one is that the analogy that everybody is getting the same beer is wrong. But number two, the fact that everybody is even drinking at the same bar is wrong.
Which everybody knows. Everybody knows that if you have a certain kind of money, you're much more likely to be found in an expensive bar, in an expensive lounge, et cetera, than if you are your average person going to a neighborhood bar, et cetera, et cetera. So the game here is to begin, which is what this story does, by positioning everyone equal, which is just plain silly. The second way to get at the confusion here is just to remember the history of the income tax, because it says really the whole thing. The income tax in the United States was passed in 1910, so we're literally a 100-year-old system. When it was passed, there was great anxiety among the mass of people that they would now suffer a new tax from the government. So when it went through Congress and was passed by the two houses and signed by the president, the promise was made that this tax would never change, and now let me underscore this, from its initial intent, which was to be, and I quote, a tax on the rich. It was to be a tax that went after the top 1 to 4% of the American people, the richest, because, and this was the argument that was made, they were the most able to pay, and they should be called upon to contribute to the common well-being according to their capacity.
And that's the text in the original legislation.
Yes, that's the debates. I mean, I don't have the words in front of me, but yes, that was the whole context.
Right.
And it was passed, and it was levied at first on the rich, and exclusively on them, that the vast majority, 95 or more % of the people, had no income tax to pay. What you have in the last 100 years, to make a long story short, is a sustained political effort by those at the top to spread the income tax off of their exclusive shoulders and on to everybody else's. And this for two reasons. The more the average person, up and down the income distribution, had to pay income tax, the less of the special pressure would come on the super rich to pay that money. But even more important, the more the tax was spread, the rich understood, the more the mass of people would become their allies in arguing against an income tax, or at least in arguing to keep it down. So what we have is a current income tax that has achieved most of the desires of the super rich. They now don't pay all of it. They don't even pay anything like all of it. The vast bulk of the taxes are paid by up and down the income distribution. Really, only the people at the bottom are exempted from the income tax. Virtually everybody else has to pay it. So if you look at the sweep of history, they have done really extraordinarily well.
And let's address briefly the second part of this Bar Stool Economics video, which says, when there is a tax cut given, and in this case it was a $20 discount on the total of $100 paid for 10 beers, while the overwhelming majority of the dollars goes to the richest person, proportionately it's actually a very small piece, which is a similar argument that we hear when we think about the Bush tax cuts. Address that part for us.
Okay, there you have to understand how the income tax works. Everybody pays the same rate on the same portion of their income. A lot of folks kind of find this difficult to understand. Let me explain.
Yeah.
Everybody pays the same rate on the first $10,000 a year of income they get. Everybody pays a higher rate on the next $10,000 and so on.
Marginal tax rates.
That's right. So when you hear that the people at the top have a marginal tax rate these days of 35%, that does not mean that they pay 35% of the whole amount.
Right.
They only pay 35% of the highest bracket. Now, it could, of course, have been a system in which every $10,000 you earn more, or every $20,000, the rate goes higher. Had that been done, then people at the highest rate would have been paying 70, 80, 90% of the top of what they get, the last 10 or 20,000 of their income.
Sure.
And it was that way in the United States back in the middle of the 20th century.
A lot of people forget that, or at least don't know it.
That's right. For example, there were periods of years in our country where the people at the highest rate paid 91, that's right, you heard me correctly, 91% of the top. These were the richest Americans earning millions of dollars a year. And while they paid the same rate on the first $50,000 that everybody else paid on their first $50,000, they did have higher rates all the way to the top. All of that, after World War II, was basically pared down with the biggest cut for the wealthy coming from Ronald Reagan in 1980, when he cut the top rate from 71% to 35%,
right,
which was a staggering cut in the income tax for the rich, and was not paralleled by anything like such a cut for the middle or the poor. So when you actually understand the income taxes system, you'll know that the whole point of it initially was to tax the rich. That was the legislation, that was the debate, that was a decision made by the Congress and the President at that time. What has happened ever since, and what this video is part of the effort to continue, is to basically get the rich out of the position of having to pay more than other people on the grounds that they have a greater capacity to pay. But there is another flaw in this video, among its many, that also needs to be addressed. What the comparison here is with the rates of tax. That is the literal schedule that the Internal Revenue Service puts out as to how much you have to pay on each additional $10,000, $20,000 of income per year that you earn. But if you know anything about how our tax system works, you will know that the stated rate is what very few wealthy people pay.
Sure.
Because they have two rights that are crucial, that the mass of people do not have. One, they have the right to take what are called deductions and exemptions of all sorts. For example, if you maintain a magnificent ranch where you go in the winter to ski and in the summer to relax, and if you have 12 head of cattle on there, you can call this, in our country, a farm, a gentleman's farm, a research farm where you're testing new cuts of beef,
right,
or new, and then you can deduct all of this as an expense of your research or of your beef program, of your farming activity.
Well, this goes to what Warren Buffett said, that he actually pays a smaller portion of his income than his secretary to taxes.
That's right. And that's because he has the right to use this first thing, a huge set of exemptions. And let me make clear here, those exemptions are available, of course, on paper to middle income and poor people, except middle income and poor people don't have the money to do the kinds of things these exemptions give you a break for, so they are technically available to the mass of people, but in reality, completely unavailable.
That's exactly right.
And the second example is, and really anyone who looks at this video and understands anything will see right through this, is that there is an enormous profession of people in the United States who go by the name tax lawyer, tax accountant, tax advisor. You have to pay these people pretty high rates of fees and salaries and retainers to get them to advise you on the immense variety and complexity of all of the exemptions and deductions that have been written over the years into the tax code. It would never make sense to pay these individuals that many thousands of dollars per year in fees unless you were a wealthy person, rich enough to be able to expect that even if you pay them 10, 20, 30,000 to manage your taxes, they're going to save you much more than that. And yes, I was going to use the Warren Buffett example. There are many examples of wealthy people across America. You could interview any one of them, and if they were halfway honest, which many of them are, they will tell you proudly how they searched for and found the tax advisor to whom they pay $20, $30, $40, $50,000, but happily because he saves them millions. And what they mean is millions off the stated rates that they would have to apply if they could not access those kinds of exemptions.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah, the video just uses the stated rates as if those were what wealthy people pay.
And as we know, they certainly are not.
No, that's what they, and they're proud of that, and they're proud of their ability to tap into these exemptions. And let me stress, everything I'm talking about now is legal. I'm not even raising the question, although we ought to, about what is illegal. In the United States, it is not difficult to set up bank accounts in other countries, to instruct the banker in the other country where you set up an account to use the money you put into the account to, for example, buy and trade stocks and bonds, earning you dividend interest, income.
No, but then that certainly happens, but we're getting beyond the scope of just refuting the Bar Stool Economics, which you have done a great job of doing. Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. We'll talk again soon.